Hello, I'm Sofi. Welcome back. Today I'm going to demonstrate how to do plain seams. Plain seams or plain seam allowances are used on every garment. Let's say you make a skirt or a dress. You stitch a side seam, meaning the front is stitched to the back. You are going to stitch a specific amount of seam allowance and you're going to finish that seam allowance so it looks nice and clean. Let me show you an example. Let's look inside of this garment. You see here, this garment has 1/2 inch seam allowance. This is a plain stitch, 1/2 inch seam allowance edged with overlock seam. Seam allowances can be different. In production, currently they're using 1/2 inch seam allowance only because they don't want to waste fabric. The garments are not usually fixed. That's why whatever seam allowance is, it stays like that. But on good garments, sometimes you can see 1 inch seam allowance, 3/4 of an inch seam allowance. So my suggestion would be for practice to make 1/2 inch seam allowance plain stitch, 1 3/4 of an inch seam allowance, and 1 with 1 inch seam allowance. Here there are some examples here, samples, where you can see 1 inch seam allowance finished, 3/4 of an inch seam allowance finished, and 1/2 inch seam allowance finished. Fabric preparation includes getting 2 rectangular pieces off of your muslin fabric where the length is 13 inches and the width is 4 inches. In order for you to do your 3 samples, you're going to cut 6 of those. For directions how to prepare your fabric pieces correctly, please refer to my quilt project video on YouTube. Again, on the straight grain, my piece measures 13 inches, and on a cross grain, it measures 4 inches. So I'm doing my number 1 sample, which is with 1/2 inch seam allowance. Here's what I do. I would like you to identify your surfaces as right and wrong side of the fabric, because you have to get used to working with sides of the fabric. So let's say this is the right side of my fabric and I am adding a textile design to it. Say this is the right side of the fabric. I'm going to place my swatches face to face or right sides touching to each other. Edges are matching perfectly, and then I'm going to pin about 1/2 inch away from this edge where I want to stitch. Please make your pinning like with small pinches. In other words, not like this, not like that, but like this. So your 2 layers of fabrics are connected firmly with each other and they don't twist and move. Let's sew 1/2 inch seam allowance right here. I'm going to place the edge of my fabric against the line that actually automatically measures 1/2 inch distance from the needle. Sink the needle into the fabric, and again, remember this is supposed to be a real garment, so we have to secure the edge of the stitch, meaning beginning of the stitch, and secure stitch at the end. Secure stitching means applying a reverse stitch for a couple of stitches. So here I am going to, I can even walk with my wheel to a couple of stitches, then press the reverse stitch, go backwards, and then let it go. Continue going straight, and you are stitching 1/2 inch seam allowance. When you get to the needle, remove it. At the end of the stitch stop, push the reverse stitch dial again and let it go. So you see, the beginning of the stitch and the end of the stitch are secured, so they would not fall apart until I finish my garment. Let's press this. So first I'm pressing it flat, so the seams are getting mingled with the fabric. Then I'm going to open my seam allowance and press it flat. if we pretend that this is my skirts inside, so my seam allowance would look like this right now. But we have to finish the edges, so after washing the garment, it will not fall apart. We can finish it either with overlock machine or a zigzag. Right now I'm doing both. You see, when I do my overlock stitch, the overlock machine automatically cuts all the fuzz at the edge. Since my regular machine that does the zigzag doesn't have that possibility, so I'm going to clean up the edge. Please don't cut off the fabric because the seam allowance measurement will change. So both of the finishes will be appropriate. And then you finish up all edges, clean everything up, press them, and that will be your finished sample. So again, you can do 1/3 inch seam allowance with a plain stitch and 1 inch seam allowance. This will conclude my demonstration of plain seams for you. I'm Sofi Kachmanian. It was a great pleasure for me to do that demonstration for you. For other videos, please watch my sewing videos on YouTube, pattern making or draping ones. If you liked my demonstration, you can like and subscribe. See you next time.